Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, this is now episode 34 of the podcast of Forward with myself, Brother Mahdi Locke. And today I wanted to build on the topic that I covered last time, i.e. cultural Marxism and communism. And I wanted to look more into the topic of, or the issue of the victim mentality, the victim mindset. And in particular, to be a bit more precise, to look at the concept of depression compared to gratitude. Because I do have a blog post that I did a year ago on the topic of depression and gratitude. And again, I apologize, you're going to hear my mouse clicking as I go through tabs to go over this stuff. But what I wanted to stress before I get into things, I don't want to go into the medical side of things. That's not my point. I don't want to go into debates about is depression real or is it not and so forth. What I will say, and I will provide a link below inshallah, what I will say is that our understanding of depression and mental illness is not the same understanding that is found in conventional medicine or Western medicine. And there is a fatwa by Imam Muhammad Sa'id al-Balti rahimahullah on mental illness, which I've translated. Like I said, I will post it below, the link below. And his basic conclusion is that we have to understand that depression or mental illness, or whatever you want to call it, anxiety, is not merely a physical, material illness that can be, and therefore we can't assume that it can be treated by simply looking at the physical material realm. I mean, one of the things he says here is he says, thus what is called depression or long-term mental anxiety is from the effects of the spirit, i.e. the ruh, and is the consequence of some of its states. Therefore, treating illnesses like these must start from a point of view that comprises the spirit. So I would advise people to, or listeners, to look at this fatwa, read it in full. I might do a separate podcast just on this issue of mental illness. But what I want to look at in this blog post that I have is I want to look at how mental illness and depression in particular can be exploited and utilized by satanic forces or Dajjalic forces, or you can call it cultural Marxist forces, in order to fulfill their agenda or their ends. Because as I mentioned last time, this backdoor route to communism, and it's a way to set up a dictatorship, is to create a population of weak, dependent people. And I talked about how what cultural Marxism does is it tries to remove traditional support networks that individuals have, especially the family and the religious community. And what I should really add to that, which I did not add in the article, is something that just dawned on me today as I was reflecting over this, is that religion is not just a community. Religion, what religion does, and especially what I would say in the case of Islam, is it's about bettering and improving and empowering the individual, making the individual strong and resilient and capable of dealing with the challenges and vicissitudes of life. That's what Islam does for you. That's what faith does for you. So they want to take that all away so that you become dependent on the only thing left, in their view, which would be the government or the state. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. I don't want to go so much into the medical aspect of things. But if you want to understand how we understand this as Muslims, what have the ulama said about mental illness, the fatwa is there. So what I wanted to get at is, as I just indicated here, talking about Dajjalic forces, is when we talk about the Dajjal and the Dajjalic system, there's really two things that we should bear in mind. Number one, when we talk about the Dajjal, we want to have actual knowledge of it. We want to talk about the Dajjal in a knowledge-based fashion and not in a campfire type horror story fashion, right? Like as if we're all sat around a campfire and there's that guy with the flashlight pointing up from his chin, and he's talking about scary things in the night. No, we have to look at it in a serious, knowledge-based fashion. And then once we have that knowledge, we know how to act. We know how to deal with phenomena of the Dajjalic system. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would look at, or I would want to put out there, is that we should look at how a dictatorial system comes about. And like the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in hadith in the Sahih al-Jami' of Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti rahimahullah, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kama takunu yuwalla alaykum," as you are, you will be ruled over. And then again, this dovetails perfectly with ayat in the Quran, like Surah Al-Ra'd, the 13th chapter, verse 11, where the law said that He does not change the state of a people until they change what is in themselves. And also Surah Al-Anfal, the 8th chapter, verse 53, where Allah talks about that Allah does not change the blessings that a people are in until they change what is in themselves. So, if nobody, if there is a type of oppressive regime or some oppressive dictatorship, you can't just blame the government. Where's that government from? Where's that ruler from? Is it going to come from the people? You have to look at the states of the people. That's why, I forget the name of the author now. I would have to check. But one of the words that was used to describe the Soviet Union was it was the tyranny of the lie. That's what it was called, the tyranny of the lie, because everyone's so scared of being persecuted or being punished or being snatched away and put into a labor camp. People are just lying all the time. People are putting on a false face. People are putting on a poker face. They're not showing their emotions. They're not expressing themselves. So everyone is living every single day of their lives in a state of portrayal, in a state of acting. That's what it really is. It's not so much the physical oppression. It's the mental, emotional, psychological oppression where you can't even speak your mind. You can't say anything. You can't express what you're thinking. You're constantly hiding what you're thinking, hiding your thoughts, controlling your tongue, not knowing who to trust. That's the tyranny of it. And it comes from the people up. It's not the other way around. So as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Kama takunu yuwalla alaykum," as you are, however you are, you will be ruled over. So that's just something that we should bear in mind before we go into this topic. I mean, other things to bear in mind here to develop this is we're talking about how the ways in which this cultural Marxist phenomenon seeks to weaken and debilitate people. And there's really two aspects to it. So what I've said here is I've said in this video, like I said, I made a reference to a video that Paul Joseph Watson did a year ago about the sort of the fetishization and fetishization of depression and turning into an epidemic. Because if you look at the statistics, and if you just type in on Google depression statistics for the past 50 years, you will get a whole bunch of articles from the New York Times, the Independent, Time Magazine, and other places, other sources, other news organizations talking about how it's just soared. Depression has soared amongst teenagers in the past 25 years. Depression has soared amongst this group of people, or especially in the West, over the past 50 years. Suicides are up. Intake of antidepressant medication is up, and on and on and on. And why is this happening? Why are people depressed? Why do we have this epidemic? When in reality, in terms of material wealth, things have never been better. What is the real reason behind this? And is it being exploited in order to push that victim mentality? And are people being pushed by this cultural Marxist ideology to feel sorry for themselves, to go into this victim state, this self-pitying mode of being? So what I said in my article, if I can just dig it up here, I said in this video, Watson addresses the deliberate, fabricated epidemic called depression, or you could say an exaggerated epidemic. Because again, like I said, I don't want to go into the the medical discussion on the topic, right? Well, our understanding is that it does exist, but we have to understand that to treat it, we have to take into consideration the spirit. We have to take into consideration the ruh. What used to be defined as mere dissatisfaction with one's life is now seen as a sort of chemical imbalance that can be treated by medication. Again, and that's our understanding there. That dovetails what we're saying, that you can't just look at depression as a purely material, physical illness. It's a spiritual illness as well, or it's rooted in the spiritual. And therefore, an understanding of the spirit realm has to be taken into consideration. And I said, in the article, I said, this is corporatism at work as well as cultural Marxism, because the end game is to create a populace of weak-minded sissies, or weak-minded people, that's the word I used, who have little control over their emotions and will thus turn to the state to pass laws and create safe spaces. A strong victim mentality breeds dependency. So, corporatism, how does this work? So corporatism, I do have a link there for a blog post I did a long time ago. Corporatism is basically the idea of corporations and the government working together and writing out laws and regulations. It is the dominant economic system in the West. And what people tend to call capitalism, when they're railing against capitalism, is actually corporatism. It's not a free market system, really. It's a corporate system where corporations are in bed with the government, writing all the rules and regulations, and those rules and regulations keep out the competition and protect their own monopolies. I mean, a good book that deals with this topic is Liberal Fascism by Jonah Goldberg. And I quoted this example in my book, The Big Step. So he says, for example, we only have, in the United States and worldwide in a sense, but especially in the United States, you have two soft drinks or fizzy drinks manufacturers, right? You have Pepsi-Cola and you have Coca-Cola. And you have to ask yourself that question, right? If there truly is a free market in the United States, where's the third soft drinks company? Where is it? Because those two companies, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, they own everything else. They own 7-Up, Sprite, Fanta, whatever. Where's the competition? So he gives this example, and he says, and he talks about how it can be made to look benign. How the regulations can be made to look benevolent and benign, but there's actually an ulterior motive behind it. So what he says is, and I'm going off memory here, what he says is, imagine you have a statewide soft drinks company, right? So your soft drinks company is only based in one state. You're not a national company, you're just based within your own state, like, Montana or Oregon or something. And you're not, you haven't expanded nationally. Your company's not that small, not that big, right? You have a fixed number of employees. Maybe you have less than 500 employees statewide. Now, let's say the government passes legislation saying that any large company, and let's say they define large company as a company with 500 or more employees. They say every large company has to have wheelchair access or disabled access at all its stores and plants and facilities and so forth, right? So that means that if you're a large company and you have a factory or you have a store or you have whatever offices, you have to have ramps, you have to have wheelchair, you have to have disabled toilets, you have to have elevators, you have to have escalators, and so on and so forth, right? Everything has to be fully equipped and accommodated, or fully equipped in order to accommodate people with disabilities. So on paper, you're thinking, oh, this is really good. This is going to help people with disabilities. And it's true, it will. It will help people with disabilities. So this regulation gets sent to the CEO of Coca-Cola. It gets sent to the CEO of Pepsi-Cola, and they read it. Now, the point is this. The CEO of Pepsi-Cola is reading it, and he's thinking, oh, this is okay, because the CEO of Coke is reading the same thing, and vice versa. Right? So they're both in the same boat. So no one is losing to the competition in this case. On top of that, Coca-Cola and Pepsi are huge multinational companies selling thousands, if not millions of units every day throughout the world. In order to cover these so-called compliance costs, all they have to do is raise the price on their products by like a fraction of a penny. and it's covered. And again, and because these companies are so large as well, they also have their sort of internal compliance departments. They have their teams of lawyers and accountants and internal bureaucrats who can deal with these things. So it's not an issue for Coke and Pepsi to deal with this. But he says if you are this local, statewide soft drinks company, and you have less than 500 employees, you're just slowly expanding bit by bit, and you're hoping one day to see eyeball to eyeball with Coke and Pepsi, this legislation comes and it destroys you. Because for you, if you hire a few more people and you get to that point of 500 employees and now you're officially a big company, and then you have to enforce or implement all these rules and put in disabled toilets and put in elevators and escalators and ramps and whatnot, that's going to be very, very expensive for you because you don't have the money of Coke and Pepsi, and you don't have the market reach of Coke and Pepsi. And on top of that, you can't, because you don't have the market reach of Coke and Pepsi, you can't just increase the price on your products, because that will put customers off, because you're still trying to compete with Coke and Pepsi. If you raise your prices to pay for this, that'll chase away your customers. So what do? You just cut back. You no longer expand, and that's how you're forced out. So that's just an example. I'm not saying in a few minutes, but that's an example of how corporatism works, and that's a question to ask yourself when you look at the United States economy. Why is there only two? Why are there only two soft drinks companies? Why are there only three major car companies? Like, what's going on? And this is understand how the system works. And again, this is about creating monopolies. And it's about making money off people. The other thing, and I tie it in with cultural Marxism, because the end game is to create a populace of weak-minded people. So when you have weak-minded people who have little control over their emotions, they're going to turn to the state to pass laws and create safe spaces and take care of them, but they're also going to turn to products to cheer themselves up. It's what they call retail therapy. That's the euphemism that's used. Go shopping to make yourself feel better. On top of that, these same corporations are going to sell drugs and medication. They're going to make money off you. So on the one hand, it's about creating dependency, and at the same time, what they can do, so you depend on the government, and at the same time, they can make money off you because you're in that weakened state. And I'd also recommend at this point, I should add a link. You should read John Taylor Gatto's book, Dumbing Us Down. I do have a review of it on my blog called Western Mass Education, and John Taylor Gatto talks about this. He said, if we as people, we as simply as American citizens, for example, if we knew how to entertain ourselves and to feed ourselves and to do things for ourselves, like I said, the economy would just collapse. But we've been raised, and he blames the school system in large part, we've been raised to become dependent on other people for so many things, for just about everything. We can't entertain ourselves unless we have a movie, unless we have a TV show, unless we have some music to listen to. And this is all creating revenue for certain people. So that's something to bear in mind. A strong victim mentality breeds dependency. So the article goes on to say, this article on depression versus gratitude goes on to say, depression is not countered by medication, but rather by one's life decisions, according to the video. And this is very true. Because again, as Imam al-Bulti, if you go back to the fatwa, he says any sort of medication or treatment that they give in the field of psychiatry or psychology is basically going to be nothing more than a temporary cover. It's going to mask the disease and deal with it in a temporary fashion. It's not going to actually get rid of the illness, the underlying illness. And the only way to get rid of the underlying illness, to actually deal with it effectively and properly, is to take into consideration the spiritual realm, to look at the ruh. One has to be responsible and consider the consequences of one's actions and decisions instead of being reckless and irresponsible and expecting others to rectify one's mistakes. Now, one of the examples I was thinking about this when I was thinking about during the day, just how to present this podcast, and with the law alone is every success. I mean, a clear example of this would be, for example, transgenderism. Now, Joseph Nicolosi, he passed away, I think, a year ago, and he has a website. He has numerous articles about treating homosexuality and treating transgenderism. And you can imagine how he is hated and despised by the mainstream media and mainstream politicians and so forth, as being, homophobic and transphobic and so on and so forth. But he makes it very, very clear, if you take the time to listen to him, that he says there's a large segment of the population who do not want to be gay, or they don't want to be transgender. There's something they know, and as Muslims we would say, it's from the fitra. They know there's something wrong with it, and they do not want to have those desires and inclinations. But one of the things he points out, and this is an example of creating weakness, creating dependency, and promoting cultural Marxism and corporatism at the same time, is he points out, he says, I think he quotes Johns Hopkins University. They said, or they concluded way back in the 1970s, that a sex change operation, what they call gender reassignment surgery, they stopped doing these operations in the 1970s because they said they had no effect. So what they first assumed is, they said, if someone comes and says, oh, I don't feel comfortable as a man, I don't feel comfortable as a woman, I should be the opposite gender. The idea was that, okay, well, we'll give you hormones and give you surgery and make you the other gender, and then you'll be fine. But then this failed. They kept doing it. They did it for a few people, and then they realized that it didn't actually change their condition. They were still depressed. They were still suicidal. They regretted the surgery. They wanted to change back. They would resort to drugs. They would resort to suicide, and so on and so forth. So they stopped doing it. And this is back in the 1970s. But why does it still happen? Well, think about it. It's still happening now because, on the one hand, people who are transgender and do go ahead with the hormone treatment and the therapy and the surgery and whatnot, what happens? They become infertile. They're not going to have a family now. See? You're breaking up the family. You're cutting the human population. So that's helping in terms of the cultural Marxist objective. And again, you have someone who is suffering from a mental illness because they're desiring to be something that it's not actually possible to be, to change your gender. It's not possible. So they're suffering from that. So they're in a weakened state. They're dependent on the government. And this is what cultural Marxism seeks. And at the same time, it suits the objectives and ends of corporatism, because this person is going to spend thousands of dollars on the hormonal treatments and on the surgery and so forth. It's a perfect storm for them, so to speak. I remember studying. This was probably going back now 7 years. I was studying fara'id. I was studying inheritance with a teacher, a Maliki teacher. I'm a Shafi'i in fiqh, by the way, but I was studying with a Maliki teacher because fara'id, there's not a lot of differences between the madhabs. And my Hanbali teacher asked me to ask the Maliki teacher. He said, what do you do? Ask him what he would say about people who get a sex change operation. How does that affect the inheritance? And I asked my teacher, and he's a Moroccan. I asked him, and I put it in Arabic. I said "Madan shakhsun yughayyiru jinsuhu." What about someone who changes their sex? And he was writing out something on the board, and he just looked at me, incredulously, and he said, "Just kayf." Like, how does someone do that? He said, "Hal huwa yahid?" Is he going to menstruate? Hal hiya tastamni? Is she going to make herself ejaculate? Is she going to produce sperm? Like, it's impossible. So even if someone does go, our understanding as Muslims, even if someone does go through the entire process of what they call gender reassignment surgery, they go through all the gender reassignment therapy, or whatever you want to call it, and they take all the hormones and they get all the plastic surgery done, they're still the same sex they had at birth. All they've really done is they've just disfigured themselves. That's all. It doesn't change the ruling. A man's always a man, a woman's always a woman. So someone who wants to change something that cannot be changed, that should be viewed as a mental illness. It should be viewed in the same way that we would view someone who says that they should be a lizard or a snake or a space alien or a Klingon. It should be viewed the exact same way. That's not what you are. You need counseling and therapy, like psychotherapy, in order to come back to a normal mental state. But again, these people are being taken advantage of. I hope that's clear, because that's the idea, how it works from both sides. I think transgenderism is a really good example of this, of how cultural Marxism and corporatism, both tentacles, can take advantage of someone like that. They make a lot of money off them, and they create a weak person who has mental illnesses and is going to be dependent on the government. So the real way, so Joseph Nicolosi in his book, and on his website, but his main book is called A Parent's Guide to Preventing Homosexuality. If we really, really want to help these people, we have to give them counseling. We have to give them psychotherapy. We have to give them, what's the other word? I think another synonym for psychotherapy or counseling. We have to talk to them, basically, and get them to get over their childhood trauma. So if you read his book, he will talk about how, like a common thread you're going to find amongst people who identify as homosexual, for example, is that they come from a home where the mother was very domineering and overbearing, and the father was either abusive or absent. So, for example, in the case of a boy is meant to achieve masculinity, right? Masculinity is an achievement, and that is achieved through the boy bonding with his father. And if not his father, some sort of older relative, like an uncle or an older brother. And if that doesn't happen, what this boy can do is that he might retreat back into the comfort zone of the mother, and then start assuming that he feels more comfortable in a female environment, and that maybe he's better off being a female, and so on and so forth, because he hasn't achieved masculinity. Now, where Nicolosi gets attacked by, or where the angle he gets attacked from, is people will say, well, there are loads of people who grew up in those circumstances where they had an overbearing, domineering mother, and they had an absent or abusive father, and they're not gay. And that's not his argument. His argument is, based on his knowledge, every person who's a homosexual comes from that background. Every person who's a homosexual has a background where they've bonded with the mother and not with the father. Like a homosexual man, he's bonded with the mother, not with the father. He's bonded with the mother because she was overbearing and domineering and very protective, and he did not bond with his father because his father was either absent or abusive in one way, shape, or form. He's not saying that everyone who grows up in that environment, who has the overbearing, domineering mother and the abusive, absent father, grows up to be gay or homosexual. He's not saying that. But that's how his words get twisted, and that's how he gets attacked. Anyway, that's a long example. That's just something for you to bear in mind at how this works. So, back to the article. So what I said was, one has to be responsible and consider the consequences of one's actions and decisions, instead of being reckless and irresponsible and expecting others to rectify one's mistakes. And this is a key thing about being a Muslim, and how we are conservative people. It's two words here: personal responsibility. Have a sense of personal responsibility, that you are responsible for your actions, and you are responsible for the consequences. It's like there's the hadith towards the end of the Arba'in Nawawiyah. It slips my mind now, but it's about the fact that it's the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that, we as Muslims, we are excused. We don't carry any sin for what we do accidentally or out of forgetfulness. We're excused from that. But as Imam an-Nawawi says in his commentary, he says even if you do something by accident, you're still responsible for the consequences. So if you're playing football out on the street, you kick the ball really hard and it goes high in the air and breaks someone's window. You can't say, oh, well, I haven't committed any sin because it was an accident. Well, listen, you still broke the window. You still have to pay for it. You still have to fix it. So take responsibility. This is where you're going to find meaning in life. So I take it on from there and I say, however, that's not all, especially for believers. Even if you are genuinely depressed, i.e., you have lost a loved one or you suffer from a serious illness, there are ways to overcome it and bring peace into your heart. And again, what I've said here dovetails with what you will find in the fatwa by Imam al-Bulti. So I laid out a few things that you can do to counter depression or feelings of depression. And the number one thing is be grateful. And that's why I'm calling this, I call this article, I'm going to call this podcast, Depression versus Gratitude. So I said, be grateful, because Allah says in Surah Ibrahim, the 14th chapter, verse 7, if you are grateful, I will increase you. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you are grateful, I will increase you, I will give you more. And the article continues, I say, I am sure you have heard this before, so how can you be grateful in a practical sense? One thing you can do is to write down every night before you go to bed 10 things that you are grateful for that day. So something that works. It's called a gratitude list. Obviously, there are things that you're grateful for every day, such as your faith, your family, your provision, and so forth. But look at the lesser things. Look at the lesser things, quote unquote, that happen to you every day. Did someone show you kindness today? Did someone smile at you? Did a stranger do you a favor? Think about it. Allah says that He is as His slave thinks of Him. Right? There's a hadith, I believe that's in Sahih Bukhari, Imam Bukhari's collection. I think it's from Anas ibn Malik. Ana inna dhanni abdi bi. I am as my slave thinks of him. So every day, good things and bad things happen, quote unquote. And I put these in quotation marks because sometimes something can appear good, but then later on, it actually turns out to be a bad thing, or vice versa. So, for example, therefore, focus on the good things that happen, and inshallah, you will come to see every day as a good day, and Allah will increase you therein because of your gratitude. Also, I say good things and bad things, in quotation marks, because many things turn out to be the opposite. Many things turn out to be the opposite after some time has passed. What you think is bad right now might be seen as something wonderful a few months from now, and vice versa. That's something that we always forget. Something terrible can happen to you, or some sort of change can happen in your life. Schedule gets changed, a timetable gets changed, something moves, something that was unexpected and not desired happens to you, and you're thinking, oh, why did this happen? This is so annoying, and this isn't benefiting me, and I don't understand. But then something else happens, maybe 3 months later, maybe 6 months later, and then you think, that's why, that's the benefit, aha. And then you thank Allah, because you were looking at it from your highly limited, low resolution standpoint, and you were assuming that, this is a terrible thing. But Allah is not looking at it from that way. Allah is looking at everything, and in His infinite wisdom and knowledge. And we make that mistake. We should submit to Allah's infinite wisdom and knowledge and His decree. So that's the first thing. Be grateful. Number 2, understand and know that the dunya, i.e. this worldly life, will always frustrate you and disappoint you. Right? You're always going to be frustrated. This isn't the realm of perfect or the realm of perfection. Things will never fall into place just as you want them. For example, your relationships, your career, your finances, etc. And even if they do, it certainly won't last. This sounds negative, but once you understand that this is the nature of the world, and therefore you stop seeking happiness and fulfillment from it, that will bring peace and happiness to your heart. Perfection is for the next life. And it's something I could add to this. And again, I'll mention that book again. I was reading it. I'm reading over the past week, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. And it's something that I actually, now that I think about it, it actually is in my book, The Big Step, is that it's not so much about happiness in life. What you really want is meaning. You want meaning in your life. You want to be doing meaningful activities. You want to be bearing responsibility. You want to be changing your own life. You want to be changing other people's life. That's why, for example, teaching is always seen as a meaningful occupation. Being a teacher is not the same as being, a door-to-door salesman, where you feel that, or in some cases, or a lot of cases, you might feel that you're lying to someone, you're putting pressure on someone to get them to buy a product that is not that great. Whereas when you're a teacher, even if you're teaching a language, but if you're teaching something and you can see your students reacting positively, and they're really happy and they're really grateful that they're taking this knowledge from you, and they're saying, I didn't know that before, thank you so much, and then they're going to go out into the world and practice what they've learned from you or implement what they learned from you, that's meaningful. That's meaningful to you. So that's something to add, that really If you're seeking happiness in this life, that's not really going to happen to you. You'll get it here and there, but what you really want, what true happiness is to have meaning in your life. And meaning comes about through responsibility. And if you want responsibility, Allah's given it to us. And it's in the forms of worship, it's in our prayer, it's in our dhikr, it's in our fasting, and it's also in our families. How we take care of our wives, how we take care of our children, how we take care of our brethren in faith, how we take care of just fellow human beings. Take up responsibility and find meaning in life. That's what we should be doing. The third thing is do dhikr. And again, I'm sure this sounds familiar, so let's look at it practically. Depression and stress are actually caused, or at least exacerbated, by excessive thinking. Imam Abdurrahman al-Jawzi, may Allah have mercy on him, who is one of the top students of Shaykh al-Islam Abdul Qadir Jilani. Imam Ibn al-Jawzi says in his book Atib al-Ruhani, i.e. spiritual medicine, he has a chapter on how to counteract excessive thinking. And the following two chapters deal with huzn, grief, and ham, anxiety. Grief, or huzn, concerns the past. You're thinking about the past, like, oh, why did that happen? How could that have happened? I wish I could have changed that, and so on and so on and so forth. So this is grief bearing down in your mind. While anxiety concerns the future. What's going to happen? What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen next week? What am I going to do next year? What's going to happen if this happens? What am I going to do if such and such takes place? And we seek refuge in Allah from both in our supplications. Right? There's actually that famous dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min hammi wa huzni. Right? Allah, I seek refuge in you from ham and huzn, from grief and from anxiety. Imam Ibn al-Jawzi points out that thinking about the past should only involve trying to grasp something beneficial from the past, while thinking about the future should be concerning some future benefit. Thinking about anything else will be harmful and exhaust the body. Grief should only be about one's previous sins so that one does not repeat them, not about worldly things. That's a beautiful piece of advice from the Imam, mashallah. MashaAllah. So to continue the article, I say dhikr means remembrance of Allah, but not in the past or in the future, but now, in the present. To do dhikr properly, you need to clear your mind and thus your heart from excessive harmful thoughts about the past and the future. You need to come into the present moment and fully appreciate it and experience it. Don't see the present moment as simply a means to an end or an obstacle that needs to be overcome. The moment you have right now is the only time you really have. So embrace it, surrender to it, and remember Allah. You can't change the past, so leave it. As for the future, you aren't there yet. So you can't do anything about any future event or situation until it actually becomes the present. And when it does, have faith in Allah. You have to trust in Allah that you will have the resources and wherewithal to deal with it. Put your trust in Allah and have a good opinion of Him. Concentrate on your dhikr, and it will be soothing and healing. And again, what I'm saying here in this verse I quote after that is in Surah Al-Ra'd, ayah 28, those who believe in whose hearts find peace in the remembrance of Allah, only in the remembrance of Allah can the heart find peace. And I think this is the same ayah that Imam al-Bulti quotes in his fatwa about mental illness. Yes, it is the same one. Because one of the things as well that I remember now that Imam al-Bulti talks about is he talks about, he mentions that the field of psychiatry and psychology in the West has failed to treat these mental illnesses. Because they're focusing on the material, physical realm, they're not thinking about the spiritual at all. They haven't managed to conquer these illnesses. And he also talks about this in his book, Minhaj al-Hadara, Minhaj al-Hadara al-Insaniya fi al-Quran, the approach to human civilization in the Quran, which I've translated, alhamdulillah. I do have a blog post about the book. Inshallah, I will do a podcast about it in the future. But he does also mention this point about civilization, how if the Western civilization or American civilization is so advanced and wonderful, why are there so many psychiatric clinics? Why are so many people suffering from depression? Why are so many people suffering from mental anxiety? And he's not making this stuff up, because if you go back to these articles I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, in New York Times or in The Independent or Time Magazine, if you just type in depression statistics over the past 50 years, you just type that into a search engine, all these articles pop up. Like, why is this happening? So, the Imam, or not the Imam, it's just me and my article. So I said here, after quoting the ayah, I said, stress is often made worse when you are forced to wait for something. For example, while stuck in a traffic jam or standing in a queue, right? So for American listeners, that means line, standing in a line. And these are things that happen to us every day. We get stuck in traffic, when you line up somewhere, you line up at the supermarket, you line up at the gas station, whatever it is, you get stuck in a queue. You get angry. In these situations, you get angry, you get frustrated, but there's nothing you can do about that situation. Why not just accept it? Instead of having resisting the situation, why not submit to it? Submit, accept it, and use that time to do dhikr. Astaghfirullah, 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 or whatever it is. Send salawat on the Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Everyone has situations like this every day. So take advantage of them and use them to draw closer to Allah instead of resisting them. Resisting will only make you more stressed and more frustrated, and thus you will suffer. So if you go into this state of resistance and start saying to yourself, this shouldn't be happening, this shouldn't be happening, why is this happening to me? Right? And you can make it really personal and really make yourself feel like a victim. Like, why is this happening to me? Why is this being done to me? Why is it always me? You're just making yourself suffer more. You're just compounding your suffering. There's no wisdom behind this whatsoever. Resisting will only make you more stressed and more frustrated, and thus you will suffer. Surrender to the moment and connect with your Lord, and He will bring peace and ease to your heart. Allah says in Surah Al-Hadid, the 57th chapter, verse 16, has not the time arrived for the hearts of those who believe to yield to the remembrance of Allah? It's a beautiful ayah. Yield to the remembrance of Allah. Give in, submit to the remembrance of Allah. Don't be in this state of resistance. Like, why is this happening? Why is this taking so long? No, turn that situation on its head and use it as a moment to just embrace Allah, embrace His remembrance. And then the fourth thing, which is, I said last but not least, be careful with your quote-unquote consumption of news, especially TV news. Mainstream news is by and large sensationalist, right? It's meant to excite you, so that you keep watching all the way through to the commercial break. Now, that's the whole idea. It's just feeding you. It's like the equivalent of what we now have on the internet, like clickbait. It's just trying to keep you glued to the TV so that you're thinking, oh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And that you stay for the commercial break. And that's why they use these phrases like, we'll be right back after the commercial break. Don't go away. Because they're trying to keep you there. Because who's funding them? Advertisers. And then after that, I said, news broadcasters and newspaper publishers have to play with your emotions and trick you into thinking that what they're telling you is really important and will have some drastic impact on your life. This obviously has the potential to cause undue stress and even depression. For further details, please see the book How to Watch TV News by Neil Postman and Steve Powers, and With Allah Alone Is Every Success. And I actually have a book review of that very same book, How to Watch TV News by Neil Postman and Steve Powers. I called it an utter waste of time and money. I've linked it. And it's a very, very good, I would say actually excellent elucidation or exposition of what is wrong with TV and how it wastes your time, in TV news especially. Because again, all they're trying to do is keep you there, keep you entertained, so that you stick around for the commercial break. So not only is a lot of mainstream TV news, not only is it fake and made up, it's sensationalist. It's designed to keep you there for the sake of the advertisers. And I'm speaking this, and I did mention this in my book, The Big Step. I mean, I'm speaking of, I can say this from personal first-hand experience. I've dealt with news organizations like this. When I used to live in the UK, I've dealt with the BBC, I've dealt with the New York Times. In particular, I've done interviews with them, for example, and I've seen firsthand how they will cut and paste and chop and splice, and they'll do anything with you. They'll do anything. They will take whatever they need to suit their narrative and their agenda. They'll take anything they need, whatever they need to suit their narrative and agenda, they'll take that from you. Whatever does not suit their narrative and their agenda, they'll ignore it. They'll just cut it out. And it's a really scary thing to think about, because if you think about a TV show like BBC Panorama, for example, and what they do is that's only gonna be, if you take away the commercial breaks and whatnot, that's only gonna be maybe a 45-minute, 50-minute show, the whole thing. But what you don't know is that they might interview 20 people for that show, 20 different people, and those 20 different people, they're gonna spend maybe 2-3 hours with them. So they're gonna speak to 20 people, 50, I would say 15, 20 people. Each person is going to have somewhere between 2 and 3 hours of footage, of recorded footage of them talking, being interviewed. So, what's the math here? 20 times 3. So they've got somewhere between 40 and 60 hours of footage. 40 to 60 hours of footage. And that doesn't include the intro, doesn't include the narrator speaking at some location, that doesn't include, footage of whatever else they want to show. And they're going to take all that and fit it into a 45, 50-minute show. Of course stuff's going to get lost. Of course context is going to go completely out the window. So these are things to consider as well in the realm of TV news. But it's important to understand how this affects you as well in terms of your depression, your well-being. Alhamdulillah, I have not owned a TV in my life ever. I've been around television because I've lived with people who own TVs, but I myself have never owned a TV. I've not had a TV in my house for years, countless years, and alhamdulillah, I have no regrets about it. And I don't see why people should in this day and age, when everything you need is, if you really want to watch something, you'll find it online. You'll find it on YouTube or somewhere else. So alhamdulillah, I think I will end it there. I hope this has been a benefit. I hope this is a bit of an eye-opening podcast. And I should say this just in closing, again, why I call my podcast The Forward is that I just see it as an introduction towards your own further research, your own further reading. What I say in these podcasts is not the be-all and the end-all. I'm not trying to give you or anyone else the final word on this topic. We can talk about it again. We can do a follow-up. Leave your comments below if there's something I've missed out, or something I should add, if there's something I got wrong, you think I got wrong. Tell me, mention it to me. We can always revisit these topics. We can talk about them. We can expand on them. That's my job. Really. My job is not here to give the final word on everything out there. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.